While our next guest is highlighting how President Trump has faced a series of losses when it comes to cases involving his power of the pen, purse, and personnel, from his efforts to prosecute perceived political enemies such as Letitia James and Jim Comey, to his attempts to defund agencies and fire their workers. The president is losing in court the vast majority of the time.
Let's bring in right now the author of that piece and co-founder of The Contrarian on Substack, Norm Eisen. He's the executive chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund. And from 2019 to 2020, he served as special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee for the impeachment and trial of President Trump, one of President Trump's favorite people in the entire world. Norm, I'm so glad you're doing this work because I think it's God's work. I think it's very important that when people come up to me every day for good reason, in despair, and say, oh, this president has unlimited power, he's doing this, he's doing that, I say, well, did you hear about the lower court ruling that said it was unconstitutional for him to send Marines to Los Angeles? Did you hear about? And you go down the list of things, and yes, the Roberts Court has dragged their feet for far too long, waited till the end of the year on some rulings. But those lower court judges and the Roberts Court finally at the end of the year seemed to bring down some important rulings, as well as Justice Kavanaugh cleaning up just an absolutely horrific statement he made in his September ruling, saying that people could be stopped because of their race or because of where they worked or because of their accents.
Yes, Joe. The courts overall, not just those terrific federal trial courts, but the courts of appeals and now increasingly even the United States Supreme Court are saying no to Donald Trump's illegal policies. As you can see, 2/3 of the time they're stopping him. Was that tweet that you and Mika read the voice of somebody who is feeling confident about how he's going to fare at the Supreme Court in the tariffs case? I don't think so. That was the tweet of somebody, the social media, of somebody who's scared. And the president feels a great deal of frustration. I actually represented at Democracy Defenders Fund a group of genuine conservatives, including your colleagues from your time in Congress, who filed a brief in that Supreme Court case to say this is not conservative, it's not constitutional, it's not American. The Supreme Court only takes a small number of these overall cases that Donald Trump loses, and at Democracy Defenders Fund, we've been very privileged to be a part of many of those wins. We have over 241 cases and matters.
Right. So now personal retribution was something that President Trump promised openly during his campaign. Are there specific cases that you think have backfired in a big way?
Yeah, Mika, you all mentioned them. The Comey and James cases. Donald Trump picked those two signal criminal cases. He installed Lindsay Halligan just as he put in his crony prosecutors illegally all over the country. That's another place where we were very honored to help with the litigation with a wonderful team of lawyers. We brought the first test case that knocked out Alina Habba over in the Third Circuit over in New Jersey. And then that theory that she was illegally appointed, Donald Trump just can't just stick his unqualified, she's his insurance lawyer from Florida. He can't just stick these people into prosecutor roles all over the country. And that we filed a brief supporting the lawyers for James and Comey. And that case was knocked out as well, based on Halligan's lack of qualification. And now a judge is asking, why is she continuing to sign her name to legal papers in other cases? So I think those two have been a tremendous black eye and symbolize this overall losing streak that has so frustrated Donald Trump across the board, and that is gaining momentum now, even at the Supreme Court, as tilted as they've been before.
Yeah, and Willie, you know, of course, anybody complaining about these courts going against Donald Trump, of course, they're ignoring the fact that Donald Trump has deliberately, and his administration has deliberately, as is their right, decided they were going to try to push the boundaries of the presidency, of the Article 2 powers. And they have the right to do that. And the other branches have a right to say, no, that's overstepping your constitutional boundaries. But I want to underline what Norm just said, and that is Elena Habba, Lindsay Halligan were told by federal judges, no, you were appointed illegally. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually a Trump-appointed judge that is now asking Lindsay Halligan, why are you still calling yourself the U.S. attorney? You're not, and you need to come back in here and explain to me why you're doing that, because there could be professional sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, I think he thought by installing these people, he would have just blank checks to do whatever he wanted. But in those cases, the courts have stepped in and said, you were unlawfully appointed. We don't have to listen to you. So I'm curious, Norm, if we take this all the way up to the level of the Supreme Court, what that has looked like so far for President Trump. We know he was effectively granted immunity by that body. But case by case, and reading tea leaves into cases coming down the tracks here, how has the relationship between Donald Trump and the Supreme Court gone so far in year one?
Well, Willie, there's no sugarcoating it. The Supreme Court made a series of decisions. They've ruled for Donald Trump about 88% of the time, mostly on the shadow docket, where they don't really tell you what the reasoning is. But I will say that the court, in taking away essentially his power to deploy the National Guard. Can you imagine how chaotic it would be in Minnesota if he could put the National Guard on the ground as well as ICE? The Supreme Court took that away from him. I'm very privileged to represent Dr. Lisa Cook. They refused to stay the decisions in her favor. That'll be at the court next week. We'll see what happens there. We have the birthright citizenship case. That's a good example of how we've dealt with this court, because they take away with one hand, Willie, but they give with the other. Birthright citizenship first went up. The idea under the Constitution, every baby born here is a citizen. And the Supreme Court said, no, the injunction was not proper. No nationwide injunction. You need a class action. At Democracy Defenders Fund, we worked with wonderful partners to get that class action on file. 2 hours later, we had an injunction, a new injunction, within 10 days. That's back at the Supreme Court. I think we're going to be successful there. So I think you're seeing a series of cases at the Supreme Court. And then tariffs is likely to be a disaster for Donald Trump. Filed a brief for the conservatives there. So I think you're seeing a series of cases now where we're managing to overcome Supreme Court resistance, and even there get enforcement of the Constitution and the rule of law. And Donald Trump is mad about it.
The new piece is available to read online now. Co-founder of The Contrarian on Substack, Norm Eisen. Thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.